When one says SUV, the first image that comes to mind is the big, beefy, boxy, ladder-on frame, old-fashioned mudraker. But that's not really how SUVs are today. World over, they're moving towards being stylish soft-roaders. Still in India, with our crater-filled, monsoon-lashed roads, the old-school SUVs carry their charm. However, along with the mud-raking muscle for fun times, they need to be good city slickers too. If they can seat 7, it's even better. The Toyota Fortuner has been a top choice in its segment. It introduced an Autobox in 2012 to make light of urban driving. But they only offered it in the two-wheel version. Meaning, if you wanted to get a rush in the slush, you really couldn't. Now, Toyota have given their 4x4 Fortuner an auto gearbox, which means you can drive it easily in the city on the weekdays, and of course you can still take it out over the rough stuff on the weekend and have some fun with it. But we've got to see how it matches up with its competition. The Toyota Fortuner, however, is not alone. Even the Rexton, based on the first-gen Mercedes M-Class, has full-time four-wheel drive served up with a 5-speed auto. Old-school SUVs with their ladder-on frame chassis and bulky suspension systems not only look like big tanks but weigh in heavy too. And they feel like that when you first take off. You can feel the effort to move the bulk. Neither of them really feels athletic off the mark, but we did a flat-out acceleration between the two and came away surprised. The Rexton's engine delivers power in such a linear manner that it actually doesn't feel quick, but it is the quicker of the two, and in a flat-out acceleration, it just leaves the Fortuner standing. Yes, and by quite a margin at that too. The Rexton does a 10.6 seconds 0 to 100, whereas the Fortuner trails in at 12.36 seconds. Well, if you just saw that and you saw the Rexton surging ahead, you have to know that that comes as quite a surprise. Because when you're sitting behind the wheel of the Fortuner, it's the engine that feels more responsive. And I think what works really well for it is the fact that the gearbox swaps cogs a little faster, so it's ready to serve up power whenever you need it. And really, whether it's the city or the highway, the Fortuner has more than enough power and you never really lack for it. It cruises well, sitting between the 2000 and 3000 RPM mark, and the strong mid-range of the engine makes overtaking easy. Also, you don't really feel any turbo lag, so that's why the Fortuner feels better on the move. The Rexton's power plant likes to rev, and the spread-out gears keep it in its power band, which is what gives it the strong performance. But this is only in flat-out acceleration. Most other times, the Rexton is sorely let down by a fair amount of turbo lag and the slow gearbox. Every time you flex your right foot for power, there's a delay before it's served up, and that's because the gearbox pauses before it shifts down. It's not only the downshifts, but the upshifts are slow too, and in stop-start conditions, it gets all too frustrating. There's an option to shift manually from the electric button on the steering, but that too doesn't help much. However, when you're plowing through the city traffic, the steering does make it easy. The Rexton steering is really light, so driving it around in the city is a pleasure, but out here on the open roads and around the corners, it really doesn't give you any confidence at all. Feels very inconsistent, really like a video game. In comparison, the Fortuner steering isn't so easy. Now the steering does feel a little bit heavy, so whether you're nipping in and out of traffic, parking, or even when you have to make a U-turn, you realize that this really is a bit of work. However, pick up the pace even a little and the Fortuner then gains a distinct advantage. Well, that heavier steering shows up its advantage when you're out on a highway and at higher speeds, even while cornering. It really gives you an immense sense of confidence. And overall, despite having a fair bit of roll, it's the Fortuner that feels more composed and planted around the corners. In contrast, the Rexton at higher speeds almost feels like it's floating. And the steering offers little or no feedback. It bobs around on uneven roads and really doesn't feel settled. Around the corners too, it rolls considerably and never feels sure-footed. That's all from behind the wheel. But really, most people are going to be in the back seat. So, what does it feel like? The Fortuner's backseat is the more spacious one, and it feels more open, more airy, and has more legroom. The only disadvantage, though, is that the seat is up quite high, and so taller passengers may find the headroom a bit tight. The Rexton has a wider middle row and more comfortable seats, though. So seating 3 here is better, and the seat cushioning is nicer for long journeys. Now at low speed ride, the Fortuner with its stiffer suspension tends to move you around a bit. The Rexton has the edge here, but only just. Well, the ride on the Fortuner is like a cube with the edges rounded off. The sharpness from the bumps and potholes just feels better blunted, so you don't feel much filter through to the back, and overall, it's the better ride. As you gain speed, the advantage increases. At higher speeds, the Rexton's softer setup is a disadvantage, and it tosses you up a lot more. Overall, it's the Fortuner that just comes across as the better backseat. And it's not only that, the interior too feels more modern and new. The all-black interior feels sportier than before. It still has the Innova-based steering wheel, dials and aircon control, and the touchscreen audio navigation system. But it's a pleasant place to be in, and it's much nicer than the Ssangyong's very basic interior. The Rexton's dials and steering wheel look particularly old-fashioned, and there are some really poorly built plastic bits like the stalks and gear lever. To add to its woes, its screen is even more difficult to operate than that of the Toyota. On the outside, they are both the big, boxy, square, imposing, old-school SUVs that they're meant to be. Still, both look quite contemporary. Of the two, the Fortuner has a slightly harder edge to its design. The snarling nose is seriously aggressive. The nostril-like bonnet scoop and squinting headlights combine to give it an angry scowl. What makes it even more imposing is the fact that it sits a good half-foot higher off the ground than its rivals, making it tougher to climb in too. The Rexton sits lower and is easier to access. Both offer a third row of seats, and though it's the harder one to climb into, the Fortuner's is the better one. The Rexton's third row is too low to the ground. Neither of them is really comfortable, but with the split function and higher seating position, the Fortuner's third row is the more practical one.
When it comes to outright acceleration, the Rexton definitely has an advantage. It's easy to drive in the city and it does ride well. But on most other counts, it really pales in comparison to the Fortuner. The Fortuner feels more modern, especially when you consider the interiors. It also has other advantages like the fact that it's more spacious and the fact that it feels better engineered and solidly built. It also drives well, it rides well, and at the end of the day, the Fortuner is definitely our pick of the two.